protection. No rich person has better personal protection than the President of the United States has with the Secret Service. But it seems Donald Trump isn't so sure about that. He intends to keep some of his private security guards when he becomes president. They will be led by Keith Schiller, who has been the leader of Trump's private security guards for 14 years. The Secret Service has been unimpressed by Keith Schiller's performance. When a man rushed the stage at a Trump rally in March, Schiller reacted much slower than the Secret Service agents. Politico reports in law enforcement circles, Schiller's reaction was panned as too slow and was the subject of disapproving conversation among agents, according to law enforcement source briefed on the conversations. The source said one agent described Schiller as the JV trying to keep up in a varsity game. Specifically, the source said that Schiller came from a position on the dais that the agents would have used to evacuate Trump if that were to have been necessary. If that had happened, they would have run right into Keith. He was about 3 seconds too late, the source said. Secret Service veterans told Politico there are dangers to mixing private security guards with Secret Service agents. It's playing with fire, said Jonathan Wackrow, a former Secret Service agent who worked on President Barack Obama's protective detail during the 2012 re-election campaign. Having a private security team working events with Secret Service increases the service's liability. It creates greater confusion, and it creates greater risk. Wackrow said, you never want to commingle a police function with a private security function. But there could be legal advantages for Donald Trump if he continues to use private security at his rallies, especially at his rallies. At those rallies, which have been considered private events, private security guards have greater legal authority for throwing out protesters in some situations than law enforcement officers do. Joining us now is Ken Vogel, chief investigative reporter for Politico, who wrote this story about the Trump security detail and Keith Schiller. Ken, a fascinating story, as we say with almost every Trump story, unprecedented. No one's ever considered this. Anyone who had any sort of private security as a presidential candidate, as soon as they got Secret Service protection, dropped the private security because it was an upgrade. They were finally dealing with the best that exists. But that's not the way Donald Trump sees it, apparently.
Yeah, that's right. Donald Trump is extremely loyal. He sort of likes the people that he's comfortable with. He's comfortable with Keith Schiller. Keith Schiller has brought along and built this more robust team to do security during the campaign, not just security at the rallies, as well as personal security for the candidate of the sort that the Secret Service would provide. They actually did intelligence where they would go to these towns beforehand, before these rallies, and try to sleuth out protesters by going on their Facebook groups, by going around beforehand and photographing them so that they could keep people out of these rallies. That's the kind of thing that Secret Service would not do, and that's the kind of thing, the advantage, in addition to just Donald Trump's comfort, that having these people around him provides. And we understand that because Donald Trump intends to continue these rallies and to have an outside group, a nonprofit group that can accept unlimited donations, fund the rallies, he would be able to continue having this private security. Additionally, we understand he intends to bring Keith Schiller into the White House with him as a personal aide who has a sort of hybrid staff/security function, truly unprecedented.
And Ken, your article explains something to me that I've been wondering about all year, which is, how do they throw these people out of the rallies? That if any other candidate, or certainly a president, when they're out there on the road like that speaking, if someone gets up and heckles them and yells at them, no one tries to throw them out. And you've explained exactly the legal grounds on which that can occur pretty much only in a Trump rally.
Yeah, that's right. The Trump rally, I mean, all these rallies are private rallies during the campaign. And so the organizer of the rally, the campaign, has the right to determine who is an invited guest. Now, in most campaigns, what you have, certainly a campaign of a nominee, major party nominee for president, you have the Secret Service who are providing the personal security. You have staff who are basically determining who can come in and who can't come in, and they're not as eager to throw people out. And when they do, they enlist the local law enforcement, who is typically paid overtime by the campaign as a contractor to provide the security. And they are particularly leery about throwing people out who are seen as just expressing their First Amendment rights. Clearly, Donald Trump, not just the security don't feel that that those kind of restrictions, but Donald Trump himself, who engages in a very direct way with protesters during his rally, screaming, "Get him out!" And at one point in Vermont in January of this year, he actually told his security to take away their coats and throw them out in the cold without their coats. So it's something that he really takes an interest in, and he has these people around him, including Keith Schiller, who one source on the campaign described him as the most important man you've never heard of. Those are the people who are providing this service for him.
Great report in Politico. Ken Vogel, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure, Lawrence.
Coming up, Oprah asked Michelle Obama